our guests tonight are experts in this area. We have Freda Burrell, who is joining us from the UK, and we have Norma Erickson, who is joining us from the United States. I am, of course, in Chile, and Ralph is in New Jersey, so we're spanning the globe. And Freda and Norma are experts in what goes wrong when we put toxins in the form of vaccines into our bodies. They are from Sane Vax, and they have a lot of sane things to say about vaccines. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you, Dr. Rima.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed, folks. Welcome to the officers of Sane Vax, President and Secretary. Welcome to the Dr. Rima Truth Reports on Revolution Radio, which is, of course, www.freedomslips.com, Studio B. We are grateful to Revolution Radio, and we're grateful for your presence tonight.
And by the way, Revolution Radio is listener supported. You had to go to freedomslips.com to get to us if you're listening live. Make sure that you stop at the support button, at the donate button, and let them know with your dollars that this is important to you. It's very important to have real information. Now, tell us about Sane Vax. Tell us about why you don't wholeheartedly endorse the vaccine that supposedly will prevent women and men from getting diseases that they would otherwise succumb to, like uterine cancer in men. It's one of those dangerous things that we have to prevent, or cervical cancer. Sorry. Tell us the real story, ladies. Norma, do you want to start?
Sure, no problem. Rima, Sane Vax was founded on the premise that we believe vaccines should be proven safe, affordable, necessary, and effective before they're unleashed on the public. We started the organization in direct response to the tragedies around the world that were happening after HPV vaccinations, both Gardasil and Cervarix. People were being diagnosed with a huge list of maladies and being told that they were psychosomatic illnesses. And that's basically, in a nutshell, why we do what we do. We have amassed huge volumes of scientific data. These vaccines were tested using an invalid endpoint. We wrote to the FDA, got no response. They were found contaminated. We wrote to the FDA, got no response. We're taking it to the streets.
That's exactly what has to happen. Pushback works, as we've all learned over the years.
Well, let's start with the question that pretty much everybody's going to ask. But wait a minute. Isn't it important to prevent cervical cancer in women and men?
Well, first of all, men don't have a cervix, so...
Oh, there you go.
So we can cancel that half of the theory out. Cervical cancer, yes, is a threat across the world. However, it is not a threat in most developed countries where Pap screening has been implemented. The rates have dropped substantially. In fact, according to the World Health Organization, the authority, 80% of all newly diagnosed cervical cancers happen in one country, India.
And that country would be?
That country would be India.
Uh-huh.
And currently, the manufacturers of HPV vaccines, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and PATH are in a Supreme Court case for, I have to say the word alleged, but it's very well documented, violations of human rights. No informed consent prior to participation in the trials, trying to cover up adverse reactions when they did occur, and thank God India has strong advocates for their people because they took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and we're looking forward to a decision on the 28th of October.
Now, one of the things that drives me particularly crazy in this discussion is the bland and blind assurance that people have when they talk about this, that human papillomavirus is a big bad cancer virus, when in fact no such thing is the case. Let's talk about whether human papillomavirus causes cancer.
Well, let's put it this way. They have discovered human papillomavirus in 95% of cervical cancer cells that they have looked at. So, but before that part of the story, 90% of all HPV infections clear on their own within 2 years with no intervention whatsoever and no medical problems. If you develop cervical intraepithelial neoplasm, CIN1, according to the World Health Organization's primer on how to recognize and treat cervical cancer, only 1% of all CIN1 lesions ever progress at all. Most of them, 99%, resolve on their own. Now we go to CIN2. According, again, to the World Health Organization's manual on how to treat this dread disease, only 1.5% of CIN2 ever progresses. So now we're at the dreaded CIN3, the last stage before cervical cancer. Only 12.5% of CIN3 lesions progress to cervical cancer. So the whole premise behind pap smears is that those abnormals, if necessary, before they develop into cervical cancer.
We
I've
lost
never heard of anyone.
You said the whole premise behind pap smears is those abnormal, and then we lost you, so say it again, please.
Okay, those abnormal cells. Now, I know that it's politically correct right now to call them precancerous, but you can't when such a small percentage develops into cancer. So, those abnormal cells are recognized, watched, and treated by a pap smear and good gynecological care. It's happened in the United States, it's happened in Europe, it's happened in the UK. In all developed countries that have pap smears on a regular basis, cervical cancer is not a threat.
So what we have here is myth upon myth upon myth. One myth is that human papillomavirus, if present, is synonymous with, oh, you're going to get cancer. Another myth is that it's a myth, right?
Absolutely. In fact, World Health Organization put out a chart that said of all the people in the whole world that are exposed to high-risk human papillomavirus, only 0.15%, that's less than 1%, will ever develop cervical cancer.
Ooh. And so we have a vaccine for a myth. And the myth is that you're about to die of cervical cancer or genital warts or something or other. And the only thing that's going to help you out, that's going to protect you, is a 3-part vaccine that does what exactly? Does it in fact cure the HPV infection that will resolve spontaneously on its own almost 100% of the time?
No, it will not cure existing infections. And just so everybody's clear on this one, HPV is not just a sexually transmitted virus. 11% of the population has it prior to their sexual debut, and nobody knows why.
Is there any contraindication to receiving the vaccine if you already have the virus present in your system?
If you already have the virus present in your system, it will do no good for that strain of the virus. Now, they're saying that it may protect against the other 3 that you may or may not be exposed to, but unless you get tested for HPV not with the standard tests that are available, but with DNA sequencing, you don't know if it's going to do you any good or not.
No, I have. Go ahead, Norma.
You don't know if you've been exposed. And chances, when 11 out of 100 are already exposed and they haven't had sex yet, they haven't, these are young people. 11% of the population carries it. It's not going to do you any good to get vaccinated.
Is it possible that the various strains of the human papillomavirus are in fact part of the normal flora of the human body?
I believe that's entirely possible.
And if that's true, what does it mean to get rid of it, or to try to get rid of it, with a bunch of toxic ingredients? Does that help? Go ahead.
Anytime you try and suppress something that's natural in your environment, something else is going to take its place. Now, there's 140 strains of HPV. About 35 or 40 of them have been associated with cancer. There is no one on the face of the planet that can't say if HPV 16 and 18 are suppressed, that the other 38 won't take over that spot and be much more virulent. In fact,
now, go ahead.
It's possible that we're seeing it happen now. The VAERS reports for last month, there were 12 new cases of cervical cancer reported after HPV vaccinations.
Let's talk about that. What does that mean? First of all, what's the VAERS report? Second of all, what does that signify, and what are the normal rates for this situation?
Okay, the VAERS is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. It is run by the FDA and the CDC together. The FDA is supposed to be responsible for analyzing the results. The CDC is supposed to monitor it. We all know that doesn't happen. But that's where you report any adverse reaction to a vaccine, or if you're supposed to report to VAERS if you suspect an adverse reaction.
Now, is it mandatory to report?
It is. That's a tough one. It is theoretically mandatory to report. However, there are no penalties for failure to do so. So the CDC officials themselves say less than 10% of any adverse reactions are ever reported.
So is it safe to say that it's documented that there are more adverse reactions than there would be people who would actually get the disease but for the vaccine?
Oh, that is scientifically documented in several published studies now.
So it's more, so if we're talking about 0.15, that's a little over 0.1% of those who are exposed ending up with cancer, what percentage of those who receive the vaccine end up with an adverse reaction?
We can't judge what percentage of people who receive the HPV vaccines have reactions, because the adverse reactions reported to VAERS are somewhere between 2 and 10% of the total numbers that occur, and they're compared to the distributed doses, not the administered doses. No one knows how many vaccines are actually administered.
Tell us what distributed doses and administered doses mean, and why people need to care about this.
Okay, a distributed dose is Merck sends 22 cases of HPV vaccines to, let's say, Dallas Hospital. Those are distributed doses, 22 cases. Now, say the hospital in Dallas administers, let's be generous and say 7 of them. Any adverse reactions reported are reported against the 22 cases distributed, not the 7 cases administered.
Oh, so it forces an understatement of the actual.
Way big time.
Wow. All right.
Well, listen, one of the things that I really admire about the pharmaceutical industry is they have more ways of cheating statistically and lying statistically than the banks do. They're really, really, really creative at this. When you look at the way studies are conducted and the way patients who might have adverse reactions are excluded from studies, including people who die while they're in the study because that means they didn't complete the study. You have to really take your hat off to these criminal monsters who are clever and who have really, really talented psychopaths working for them. It's amazing. So go ahead. You were talking about the forced underreporting of adverse events.
Okay. Now let's compare that forced underreporting with the 12 new cases of cervical cancer that were reported last month. If it's 10%, that means that there's 120 people out there that developed cervical cancer after they were vaccinated for HPV. The problem with that is, right now in the United States, cervical cancer is a disease of immigrants and elderly people. People that haven't had a pap smear within the last 5 years are at much higher risk. But the people that are having pap smears on time and good gynecological follow-up never develop cervical cancer. So we've got between 12 and 120 cases in a young population after vaccination.
Now, what does that mean in terms of any generalization that you could make about safety of this vaccine in terms of enhancing the possibility of cervical cancer? Does it enhance the possibility of cervical cancer?
It very well could. There was one small study that was submitted to the FDA prior to Gardasil's approval and Cervarix 2 that indicated if you had already been exposed to HPV before you took the shot, Gardasil increased the risk of precancerous lesions by 46.6% and Cervarix by 46.3%, excuse me, with Gardasil, and 36.5% with Cervarix. Now, what they did with that is they decided, well, smoking is high risk, so they eliminated the people from that study that they'd already determined it was an increase. So they eliminated the smokers and they eliminated the other risk factors until they got it down to an acceptable risk level.
My point about psychopathic statistical manipulation is made well here. Let's eliminate everybody who is messing up the conclusion that we want. So there is some possibility that, quite a lot of possibility, that the Gardasil vaccine and the Cervarix vaccine actually increases the incidence of the disease against which it is supposedly given. Why are people told that they should use this vaccine? Why are parents told they should use these vaccines, and why are adults told that they should get these vaccines?
What they're told, oh my God, it's fear-mongering to the greatest degree. If you've been infected with HPV, you have a risk of cervical cancer. Anytime you mention the C word, people are afraid. Cancer has gone to epidemic proportions all around the world, and every one of us has a relative that's died of cervical cancer, or died of cancer, or a friend, or someone we know. And it's terrifying. So they're using that fear to generate sales for something that has not been proven effective. And worse yet, it's causing more adverse reactions than your risk of getting cervical cancer on top of that.
Let's talk about the other adverse reactions. What happens to people who develop adverse reactions to these two vaccines?
anything that could possibly go wrong with the autoimmune system or the neurological system we're seeing. Now, we can't say that they're caused by it yet because we don't have scientific proof, but we've got some really good studies that indicate that there are plausible mechanisms of action for both neurological and autoimmune disorders. We're finding everything from paralysis, tics, seizure disorders, muscle spasms, Guillain-Barré, acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, inflammation on the brain, allergic reactions. We've had a lot of girls end up allergic to yeast after Gardasil, and just now they're admitting that the L1 proteins that they use in the vaccine were generated in a yeast medium, and some of the yeast is in the vaccine, so that can exacerbate those reactions. We've seen anaphylactic shock, we've seen comas, we've seen deaths, we've seen, you name, what are they? I've got a blank here. Menopause, early menopause.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen infertility.
Premature menopause. The first case of that I know of was a report of a 16-year-old in Australia who went into premature menopause, and it was written up in a journal. And astonishingly enough, the doctor who followed this young woman out of her fertile life and into a menopausal life refused to be on our show. Very interesting lady, because she went online and she saw that we do not support the use of vaccines as part of a general public health strategy. And so she withdrew her participation because she still believes in vaccines. It's just that it was rather interesting and curious that this one young woman that she was treating went into premature menopause, she felt, as a result of having been vaccinated with an HPV vaccine. I thought that was fascinating.
So she remained a vaccine believer even after seeing that example. All right.
Randy Wakefield is still a vaccine believer.
That's true.
He thinks the problem is that particular MMR vaccine with autism, but really vaccines are safe and effective. Let's talk about.
We have about 3 minutes, Dr. Rima, before the end of this half. And
I want to ask Frida, what's happening in Europe in this area?
Right.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rima and Ralph. It's exactly really the same as what's happening in America and in other parts of the world. And the adverse reporting system, we have a similar system where and the same low percentage of reports are put in. And we unfortunately don't get access to what is being said. We only get the list of the symptoms, what's being diagnosed, etc. But in the United Kingdom, we started off the programme with the HPV vaccine cervix, which only had the strain 16 and 18. It didn't contain the genital wart strains. And it was by accident that I got involved because I was on holiday in Ireland in 2008, and we met an American family and we took them out and we emailed one another, and towards the end of that year she wrote to say that she thought her daughter had been injured by Gardasil, and could I start looking into this, the HPV vaccine scenario. So I did start, and I was at the bottom of the ladder because I had no knowledge whatsoever of vaccines. I had never been told that vaccines could cause a problem. I had been vaccinated. My son had been vaccinated. And so I was absolutely in the dark. So I was in this very difficult situation. So anyway, little by little, I don't know how many rungs of the ladder I have got up to, but I certainly am very much more aware of what's going on. So again, it was trying to get contact with people who had been injured in the United Kingdom. And in the earlier days, in 2008, 2009, perhaps 2010, our press were putting out stories of this vaccine, how it was causing some of the injuries that Norma has expressed, the paralysis, Guillain-Barré, different autoimmune conditions, young people being ill and they had no idea what was causing the illnesses. And little by little, I got one or two families. And in the beginning, I perhaps only had about 2 families. And we shared what information we knew, and both of us were learning at the same time. I was also very political minded. And I come from Scotland, so we have our own parliament in Scotland. But I also am in communication with the parliament in London. So I started to write to members of parliament and ask about this, raise awareness and say that, I do believe there's a problem here. And I always got the same answer back, the good of the vaccine outweighs any risks. So if your child becomes seriously injured or even dies, then tough, you've just been at the bottom. It was just unfortunate. But naturally, they would never ever try to associate the vaccine with any of the adverse reactions and illnesses. What I've been seeing, and of course, things have developed a lot. There are now a good number of UK families. We communicate very well one with the other. I don't have an injured child myself, but I do believe I have hundreds around the world. And they're very productive, many of the UK families. They are very aware of what they have to do to raise awareness. They too go to the members of parliament. And once they've been to, say, a Conservative member of parliament, if another family goes and sees their member of parliament, who's also a Conservative, I keep a record of all the MPs who are visited by their constituents. And so the second family will say, oh, by the way, so-and-so Eric Pickles, for example, is also aware that there's a problem with this vaccine, to try and raise awareness within the powers that be, that this is not a one-off. The problem is getting this awareness to reach such a level that MPs, members of parliament, will start to say, well, is this a coincidence? How can all these young people develop certain illnesses whose medical records were almost perfect prior to being vaccinated, and then all of a sudden the life of that child changes, and that child no longer is able to go to school. She's not able to get full-time education. And in some cases, the schools can be very difficult with them, but we do have a ruling in the United Kingdom through the Department of Education, because we raised questions in Parliament, and one question was raised with the Department of Education, how important it was that a young person still could be educated, even though she was sick, that the onus was on the school to provide teacher communication with the child and the family, and if it was long-term illnesses, that they should be able to be given a tutor at home. So that was one good thing that we did, and I've got the evidence of that, the question and the answer back from the minister. Now, let me think.
Oh, by the way, I have to apologize, folks. I said a couple of minutes ago that we only had a few minutes before the top of the hour. I misread the clock, and actually, we have another 10 minutes before the top of the hour.
Oh, good. It seemed to have flown too quickly. While you are telling us what happens to the people who receive this vaccine, Freda, please include any information about whether boys are also showing vaccine injury as well.
We at the moment the boys are not vaccinated in the United Kingdom. That is going to come because I'm very much aware it's been raised in the London Parliament. So I will not be surprised that if that doesn't come onto the schedule. And they'll follow the example of Australia and America in that. But it's trying to get credibility for what you're doing. I mean, why would someone of my age highlight serious concerns about children's health without there being a reason? And this is what has grown in the UK. We have a wonderful group. And what we also did, we started it last year and we're hoping to continue it this year. We prepared a poster. And the poster says not a single bad word about the vaccine because we do have to be very careful legally not to get into trouble. But what it does say, it asks a very important question in big writing at the top. Has your daughter had any serious health issues following vaccination with an HPV vaccine, either Cervarix or Gardasil? And then down the right-hand side, it gives a list of many of the serious side effects that are being experienced by many of the girls. And then on the left-hand side, it gives the reason why we're doing this. And it's to gather important information to give to our UK or Scottish Department of Health. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. And then at the bottom, it says, if you wish to, if you feel that your daughter has been compromised, please contact, and my contact details are on it, another email address I have, and also my mobile number, which is a cell phone number, so that people can make direct contact with me. And last year, I certainly got a good few new people. They would see it, these posters get put up in supermarkets or shopping malls, as you would call them, hairdressing salons, sports gyms.
Is it possible for people to contact you, by the way, through sanevax.org?
Yeah, no, they can contact me personally.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Would you like to give
I put my own personal contact details. If one of the mothers, like I've got a mother in Yorkshire, in the north of England, and she wants local people or Yorkshire to come to her, that's great. I provide her with the Word document, and she then amends it to suit her. She puts in her details, and then it gets changed into a PDF, and then gets run off. But the poster has gone round quite a number. I mean, it does take time for people to come to you. I mean, that happened last year as well. But it's gone to Northern Ireland. It's gone to the Republic of Ireland. It's actually gone to one mother in America who asked for it. It's gone to Australia. And it's done its rounds up in Scotland. And I mean, I still have more to do. I have to depend on the families wanting to do this naturally. And no problem will come to their door because there's nothing on it that makes mention of them. And if there's any problem, then it will come to me. So, my husband and I had sort of discussed this ages ago. What if the police come to our door? What are we going to do because of the work we're involved in? And by this time, we were really heavily involved. And he just looked at me and he said, well, at our age, what does it matter?
We agree. We agree with your feeling on that entirely. It's
Well, could I go back for just a second?
Sorry.
Yes.
Could we go back for a second to your question about the boys?
Yes.
I can address the stats in the United States as of last month, and the vaccine uptake for boys in the United States is still very low. There have been 30 disabled, 10 deaths, 287 did not recover, 37 life-threatening, 789 emergency room visits, 147 hospitalized, 11 with an extended hospital stay, and only 181 events considered serious. That's in just the male population in
Wow.
the United States.
How many men or boys have received the vaccine? Can we compare?
There is no way of telling. They
Oh,
don't. We can't get the administered doses in the United States. We can only go with distributed.
my.
Let's talk about the difference, if we may, between Cervarix and Gardasil. There are some significant differences. Can we focus on those for a minute?
Sure. Gardasil has 225 micrograms of aluminum, or micrograms of
yeah.
aluminum in each shot. Cervarix has 250.
Wow.
Gardasil was produced on yeast. Cervarix L1 proteins were produced in insect cell lines.
I don't know which is creepier.
Yeah. Gardasil we know has a contaminant, and the one thing that we can say for a fact is that when Japan started their HPV vaccination program, they pulled it within 3 months because they discovered that the adverse reactions after Gardasil were 26 times higher than the annual flu shot. And
I hear the bumper music.
And we'll be back. Our guests, Norma Erickson, Frida Burrell. We're talking about HPV and vaccines here on the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. This is information that you need and that you need to share with others. Don't go away.
Listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back to the second hour of the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. I'm Rima Ilebo, MD. I'm the medical director of the Natural Solutions Foundation, and with me, as always, my co-trustee and our counsel to the foundation, Ralph Fusatola, JD. Natural Solutions Foundation presents this and a great deal of other information to you. And we do it free of charge, but we need your help. We also need your support in terms of building a war chest so that we can take on the tyranny of the FDA that quite literally does not want you to have the information that we are sharing today, that quite literally will not respond when Sane says to them, these vaccines are contaminated with DNA that causes a vast number of problems. They're contaminated with huge amounts of aluminum, causing vast numbers of problems. And the FDA says, you are obviously not a very rational person. We don't have to deal with you. We don't have to deal with the science. And we also will try to silence you in all kinds of clandestine and overt ways.
And Dr. Rima, and it's not just the government, Dr. Rima.
No,
such bastions of liberty as on the right Reason magazine and on the left The Guardian newspaper in England have both came out within a 1 month period a few months ago with people saying that those of us who are vaccine refusers should not be allowed to be heard in public.
And the Secretary of Health and Human Services said the same in the United States. And recently, the Prime Minister of the UK said that people who basically disagree with the policies of the state are terrorists and should not be given the opportunity to disagree in public with the things that the government chooses to do, like spying or going to war for no particular meaningful reason. We need your support, and we offer things that you need, like nano silver, 10 parts per million. That's http://donate.drrima, RIMA, truth nanosilver.com. And we ask for your donations. We ask for you to look at our store offerings and see the CBD products and the silver products and the other things that you need. And we ask you to donate. We also ask you to disseminate. There are action items that you need to take. And those action items put pressure of the kind that Freda Burrell is putting through her parents' group and groups and visiting the members of parliament in the UK, the kind that Norma Erickson is putting on decision makers here, because they're all cowards. They're all cowards. And they do quail before the might of public outrage. We also ask you to get yourself a protocol so that you know how to use the nano silver. And to do that, you go to another website. Remember, we have to separate product and opinion because of the Fraud and Death Administration. So we ask you, if you want my protocol, which is my gift to you on how to use nano silver to protect yourself and support your immune function, especially in this Ebola situation, then please go to www.drrimatruthreports.com. Fill in your email information on the form on the right-hand side of the page, and you'll receive a thank you letter. The thank you letter will bring you an access link to my protocol on dealing with this immune threat, which can kill you. And it will also bring you a subscription without charge to our newsletter, because you will need updates. You will need accurate information that surely the mainstream media is not going to bring you. And you need somebody who is able to sort through the medical implications of what you're hearing and the legal implications of what's going on, and bring you the reality. And that's our newsletter. So that's going to the form at www.drrimatruthreports.com and getting those 2 gifts of ours to give you the gift of information and perhaps survival. What were you going to say, Ralph? I think I interrupted you.
I'm not sure. I was listening to what you had to say. I was going to say, if you want to get access to all of our action items, what is an action item? It's a web form that is set up especially so you can send messages to decision makers. It knows if you're an American who your congressperson is and that sort of thing. And it allows you to send messages to lots of interesting people, sometimes including, the UN Secretary General or various other people, the Olympic Committee. If you go to one of our tiny URLs, and this one, of course, is tinyurl.com, push back here, you'll find a list of those action items. The most recent one, of course, is the action item having to do with the silver issue, and that is tinyurl.com/don't, D-O-N-T, don't stop nano silver. It's an action item that lets you send messages to decision makers on this important issue, and we need your support. We need for the agencies to hear that the public wants this information. The Supreme Court said in 2002 that we have long disapproved of the idea that the government has any interest in stopping people from making what the government thinks are bad decisions with truthful information.
Like not getting vaccinated, for
right,
example.
Exactly. And we are sure the courts will support us in this effort. All we need to do is get there, and we're going to get there. It's tinyurl.com. Don't stop nano silver.
If you've been listening to this show and reading our newsletters, you know that they indeed have tried to stop nano silver in Africa because they didn't want people to get wind of the fact that they didn't have to die. None need to die from Ebola. And so they really made a huge push to stop it, but we got it there, and other people have gotten some sorts of nanos over there. And what we're hearing is unconfirmed reports from very highly placed, highly reliable sources that it's working. And if it works in Africa, by gum, it'll work in Spain, it'll work in the EU, it'll work in the United States, because immune systems aren't different in various parts of the world.
But I also
go ahead.
I also point out, Dr. Rima, that while the tests are happening, the clinical demonstrations are going on, and we're getting some interesting verbal reports, we're still waiting for official reports.
Oh, yes.
And at the very same moment, 4,000 American troops are supposedly heading towards Liberia alone. And $700 million has been set aside for the war on Ebola.
Now, who is going to get that money? Do you think it's the poor, starving people who are dropping dead from Ebola? Probably not.
Indeed.
Now, moving back to our guests, Freda Burrell and Norma Erickson of Sane Vax. What is a Sane Vax? How are there such things as safe, effective, necessary, efficient vaccines? Is that possible? Or
safe, affordable, necessary, and effective?
Yes, sorry.
It's quite possible. There are technological advances that are there and available to make vaccines much, much safer than they are at present. We've concentrated primarily on HPV vaccines because, in our opinion, it's the worst one ever created, and it exemplifies everything that can possibly go wrong with a vaccine.
How so? How is it the worst one?
Well, for instance, in Colombia they recently began their HPV vaccine program. Upon administration of the second dose, 200 girls were admitted to the hospital in one day.
Oh my God.
700 have now been injured in the same town. Parents are conducting peaceful marches demanding answers. They've been told that it's all psychosomatic or that their daughters used Ouija boards too much.
Oh, witchcraft. Of course, witchcraft. Obviously.
Exactly what I said.
Obviously.
I thought you said that the girls used Ouija boards too much.
Yes.
That's
exactly
what
she said.
I said
witchcraft. I don't know, Dr. Rima, it's...
Yeah, I know. I got it. What this indicates, again, is this spectacular level of creativity. Because really, Norma, Freda, Ralph, you're very creative, intelligent people. Could you ever have thought of that?
I would have never dreamed of an Ouija board being an excuse for an adverse reaction. No.
Wouldn't you think that somebody deserves a Fool of the Month prize?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Perhaps the decade.
Oh, perhaps. Well, no, I mean, there's so much more happening. I don't think that it's a decade worth, but it's certainly of the month. That's astounding. And so they were cured of their Ouija board obsessions, and then they went back to school?
No, many of them are still at home. Some are paralyzed, some are in comas, some cannot attend school at all. They're having seizure disorders, much like in the United States, only on a much higher rate that I'm ever aware of. Colombia has been the highest rate that we have seen so far. Now, it's entirely possible that the rate is the same around the world, but it's evident in Colombia.
So possibly the reporting is better in Colombia.
Well, the parents immediately, started demanding answers. All of them. I read a report just this morning where they had blocked the street with a protest, a peaceful protest, and got assaulted with tear gas, and then they responded with rocks and sticks. It's not a pleasant situation by any wild stretch of the imagination. the first adverse reactions came in a few months ago, and the first Colombian doctor that reported it to the pharmaceutical company had the pharmaceutical rep on his doorstep from the United States the next morning telling him it was psychosomatic. And this particular doctor said, there is no way I'm buying into this garbage, and he shoved the guy out his door. But that's not the case with all of them.
No.
Do you not think it's strange as well, the psychosomatic disorder that appears to be going around the world? This strange virus that's attacking our teenagers and young men and women, that is just, it's hard to believe we're in the center of this, that any government or any health official could possibly believe that on the map of the world, all these lights would appear in all the countries where adverse reactions were being experienced from HPV vaccines. And these lights were sparkling and shining. So every country, and all of these are psychosomatic. So who is putting out this strange virus or whatever is polluting the atmosphere that is causing these psychosomatic, allegedly, supposedly, symptoms on our kids?
Well, let's talk about who here. There are two who's to talk about. The first who is the World Health Organization, and the second who is the the vaccine manufacturers themselves. Let's talk about how they created a market for something that is causing more of the condition that it's supposed to alleviate than there was. And let's talk about how the World Health Organization plays into this. What is their position? Let's talk about the market first. I believe that Merck won an award for Gardasil.
Creating a market out of thin air.
Say that again,
Yes.
because I was speaking while you were, and I want people to hear.
Sorry. I couldn't help that one. Yes, they got an award from the National Advertising Association for creating a market out of thin air. And that is exactly what they did.
And what I find very interesting is that we see the same pattern repeating. We see the pattern of what happened with autism, going from one child in 10,000 when Dr. Rima started practicing medicine, to in some parts of the United States, one child in 50, perhaps it's going to be up to one child in 2 soon. Yet this huge increase has never been attributed to a cause. There can't be a cause. It must be just better reporting or something. How can a 10,000-fold increase possibly have a cause? How could it not have a cause? And the same blindness is being applied to the HPV vaccines. How could it not have a cause?
Also, if I can just interrupt here a little bit, the vaccine, when it came out in America in 2006 and then later in other countries, was only looking at and directing at 2 of the high-risk strains of HPV, 16 and 18. And Norma explained earlier how that there are very, very many more high-risk strains which may lead to cervical cancer. And this is now being evidenced on the vaccine adverse events reporting system. Young vaccinated kids are developing the condition they were vaccinated to prevent. I did some work on that in the United Kingdom, and I wrote to the health minister down in London, and I raised this point. I said, nature being what it is doesn't like a void. Can you tell me what research, what knowledge you have, that other high-risk strains will not come and take the place of 16 and 18? And she had to write back and say that she had no knowledge of that. So no research had ever been carried out. So that is why many of the young people who have been vaccinated, it appears that their other strains are coming over and taking the place, or perhaps the vaccine didn't eliminate 16 and 18 in the first place.
Well, I was going to ask, does the vaccine actually eliminate anything? I'm not aware that a vaccine has ever actually eliminated a disease. It has produced, in many cases, ineffective antibodies that do not provide immunity, but do the vaccines, in fact, eliminate anything other than good health?
Other than good health. You know, and we've got a perfect story that just came in like 2-3 days ago. This girl's name is Skyly. She was 13 when she got her first Gardasil injection in August of 2013. Her doctor recommended it. Her mom wasn't sure about it, so she texted her sister-in-law, who was a nurse, who said she was going to give it to her daughter, and she texted one more, and she looked at the vaccine information sheet that she got from the doctor that said mild things like fever, pain at the injection site, maybe fainting. Well, this little girl, 13 years old, 12 days later, I'm going to read through her list of symptoms that began 12 days after her vaccine. Pain through her whole back, including her arms and legs and shoulders, chest pains, stomach pains, headaches, stabbing pains in her head, the need to constantly crack her fingers, toes, and ankles, back and neck, chronic fatigue, weakness, walking from class to class was too much for her sometimes, shortness of breath, dizziness, she saw green and red spots, other various visual
Clearly
problems.
hysteria. Clearly hysteria. Dr. Rima, wouldn't that have been the psychiatric analysis in Dr. Freud's era? All women were hysterical. All women were hysterical.
They would have been worried about their wandering uteruses.
Right. It's madness.
Yep. Dry eyes, dry mouth, light sensitivity. She has to wear dark glasses inside the house and out at school.
Wow.
Blurred vision. Sometimes she is unable to read because of it. Teachers and friends have to read and write for her. Jittery mood swings, talking extremely fast, forgetfulness, and irritability. She ended up in a wheelchair. And over the past year, burning eyes, hot flushes, night sweats, heavy periods, tightening of her chest, tingling in arms, legs, fingers, and toes, poor balance, motion sickness, dizziness, difficulty focusing, nosebleeds, eye pains. She's bruised easily, legs, hands, and feet, and ankles cold to the touch. She always has at least 2 of those symptoms, sometimes many more. And those began 2 weeks after her vaccination and have lasted an entire year.
My God.
We are talking about an autoimmune mediated inflammatory cascade situation. Just in case anybody wonders, how can all those symptoms be caused in one person by something as simple as a shot? The shots are not simple. And the Cervarix also has squalene, which is a perfect storm of an autoimmune precipitator. If you want to know what autoimmune disease can look like, think about Gulf War syndrome, because the veterans who received vaccine A, which had squalene in it against anthrax supposedly, those veterans have antibodies to their own squalene as well as the introduced squalene, and these girls are showing very, very similar responses, autoimmunity to their own tissues that waxes and wanes.
Dr. Rima?
Yes.
What would you, if you were presented with a patient and you were in practice and wherever the patient was, and it was all, you were actually responsible for that patient as a physician, what strategy would you use for a person presenting with those symptoms?
Well, the first thing I would do is focus on the GI tract. The immune system, 80% of the immune system resides within the GI tract. And these girls are inevitably going to have not only damaged immune system cells and immune function in their GI tract, but they're also going to have a good deal of gut inflammation, and they're going to have leaky guts, so that additional proteins, not just the ones that were introduced in these monstrous vaccines. But I repeat myself, I happen to believe all vaccines are monstrous. But the gut will be leaking additional proteins into the bloodstream because it's not functioning properly. And so much of the waxing and waning that these girls are experiencing in their symptoms is because of the additional burden of the autoimmune component. So I would fix that pretty quickly. The next, and by starting from the gut, I would detox these girls. They're carrying huge burdens of aluminum. Now, most of these girls have not just been vaccinated one time in their life. Most of these girls are carrying mercury and aluminum from the other vaccines that their loving and concerned parents thought they were supposed to get because their doctors lied to them.
And of course, add to that the toxins in the food supply, the toxins in the industrial supply system, and the ever-present drip of Fukushima radiation.
Exactly.
The perfect storm.
And so I would, part of cleaning up the girls' GI tracts is also cleaning up their diet. If these children or women or boys or whomever were under my care, they would now be on a completely organic or better diet. And they would be detoxing through the healthy foods, and through supplementation. They would be taking digestive enzymes. They would be probably doing some chelation therapy, probably intravenous, and sound. I would be using vocal profiling. I would be looking at their voices, and I would be taking out the frequencies that didn't belong there and putting in the frequencies that they lacked. And I would do that through the process and the technology of human bioacoustics. Very, very important. I would also, if they had neurological symptoms, and many of them do, I would also be treating them with neurobiofeedback, which is retraining the brain to readjust its function so that it goes back to regulating itself and the rest of the body and the psyche well. You notice in there are no drugs. Right? There are no pharmaceuticals.
But there are
using lots and lots of nutrients, right. And they need nanosilver because their immune system is not functioning well. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ralph.
And CBDs, especially for neurological balance. Especially.
CBDs, these girls either don't have enough cannabidiol in the endocannabinoid system, or they cannot utilize them because the receptors are not receiving them well. And those CBDs would provide enormous symptom relief and allow the body to actually heal the non-digestive and in many cases the neurological lesions. Yes, that is precisely what I would do.
I wonder if I'm listening attentively to what you're saying, Dr. Rima, and if only we had in the United Kingdom, Scotland, the expertise that would understand what you've said, and who would know that the young girls have got to be healed in that way. That is one of the serious issues, and that's why I try to raise awareness in the political world. And we have been successful. We had a meeting with families and their daughters to the shadow health minister in London in June of this year.
So you have to explain what the shadow means to folks.
The shadow is the opposition.
Okay.
If Conservatives are in power, then it's Labour. It's the opposition main party, and they're regarded as the shadow health minister. And her name was Luciana Berger. And she met with our families And there were other MPs there present listening. There was Countess of Mar from the House of Lords. And it was an absolutely excellent presentation. And I know that I did send you a copy of it because I did a press release afterwards. And we had a photograph of the families who were there. Now, what we're trying to do now is take it to the next stage, and that is to have a meeting with the actual health minister of the government and to allow the families to have their voices heard. So I'm in the process of trying to do a lot of lobbying, political lobbying on that front. But there's another meeting I'm hoping to get organised, and that's with the Secretary of State for Health, Jeremy Hunt, who I should add is very pro-homeopathic remedies.
Excellent.
Yes, he has a Chinese wife. He's actually somebody I really quite respect. Have you ever known a Secretary of State who will go into a local hospital once a month, put on scrubs, nursing uniforms, and wash down beds? No, I have not.
No.
He does that.
But we do have a potential presidential candidate in the United States, Dr. Rand Paul, who's gone off to Guatemala and done eye operations for needy people, something like once a year for the past decade. So
he
sometimes
has stood up for. There's been problems in hospitals, lack of good care, lack of duty of care. In old people's homes, and he has actually stood up instead of the normal rhetoric he would get, oh no, there's not a problem. He has come out and said, yes, there is a problem, and we're going to address it.
Excellent.
So the reason for
I believe he is the minister who addressed the problem of Eleanor Bai's murder and was responsive to them after we made the video, if I'm not mistaken.
I couldn't honestly be certain of that.
Okay.
But what I'm hoping to do is for a small group of families, because sadly, and I presume, I'm not sure if this is happening in America to the same degree, but any of our families who stand out and make a noise and make a fuss, who tell the doctors it's a vaccine, who write political letters, who maybe even go to the press and the articles were being published, they get picked on. And there's families who have been investigated within closed doors for Munchausen by proxy. There's another family where the daughter was put under child protection, not taken away from the home. Those social services would have wished to do that, but they didn't. And she won her case on appeal. There's another family in the south of England whose daughter has been sick since 2009, a young tennis player, and who ended up having to go into hospital. They said she had a severe case of early chronic fatigue syndrome. She was then forced, and literally the family was threatened with legal action if her daughter was not put into a secure psychiatric unit for eating disorders. The young person doesn't have an eating disorder, she just didn't have the strength to feed herself. She would have eaten the food if given the opportunity. Fortunately, through the Countess of Mar, through a good lawyer, through a good social worker, that young lady has been taken home and is now under the care of the health service. But our health service doesn't have your knowledge, Dr. Rima. They do not know how to treat these kids. But what I want Jeremy Hunt to listen to is to see the persecution that is taking place because we disagree. You're not allowed anymore to have a voice. You're not allowed anymore to say the opposite of what the government or the Department of Health or to any social services in particular, with the threat of taking away your child because you say, I believe that my daughter's illnesses were caused by the vaccine. That is not allowed. And that is why this second meeting is so important that I achieve it. Now, I got a lovely surprise just a few days ago. I got a letter from a Member of Parliament in London who I met last year. And he wrote to me and said, Frida, I understand you have a campaign. How can I help you? Now that was just wonderful.
Yeah.
So I have sent him all the information and said, please, two things: a meeting for the families in the United Kingdom to go to meet with Jane Ellison, the UK Health Minister, and also for a certain number of families and myself to meet with Jeremy Hunt, the Secretary of State. And in Europe, this will take a bit longer. We are hoping, and again with the help of Michelle Rivasi, who is a member of the European Parliament in France for the Green Party. She is very much against the Gardasil vaccine, which is used in France. And as you know, Dr. Rima and Ralph, so much is happening in France at the moment. She asked for a moratorium on the vaccines of all the 28, 29 European states. But what we're wanting to achieve there is to have a meeting of as many families and their daughters from as many European countries as is possible to go to Brussels and meet with members of the European Parliament from their own countries and express their concerns, their fears about the vaccines. Let them see their daughters, let the girls speak, because the girls have great power, as I witnessed down in London in June. And that is, it will not happen this year, but God willing, it may happen next year. So that is what we're trying to do here in Europe, and we have the advantage of being able to speak with our members of Parliament. I can go and see my MP in Scotland once a month and meet him face to face, and he has to react to what I ask him to do. Whereas I don't think you have the same.
We do. We're permitted access to our members of Congress or our state representatives and Congress people. And we have found that it's extremely effective when people go in groups and they go with talking points in their hands. They're not rambling. They're not talking about their dog.
Right, organized and nicely dressed and all that good stuff.
Oh, yes.
Exactly.
And they're nice and polite, and they don't raise their voices. And they say, we're concerned voters, and we have lots and lots and lots of friends who also are concerned voters, and we'll vote you out of office in a heartbeat if you don't address our issues. We find that that's actually much more effective than most people realize it could possibly be. And that's interesting. They'd rather you didn't know that, of course, but we do know that. Now, you said the girls have great power. Yes, when people who have been injured or abused speak clearly and directly on a human-to-human level, the impact is often remarkable. And that's very important, too. That's another tool of political organization that we forget about. This is about people. And somewhere, most of those elected decision makers or appointed decision makers, not all of them, but most of them are still people somewhere. And if you touch them at the people level, you can have remarkable transitions take place.
Yep. Often, by the way, here in the United States, there are a number of exemptions which people can attempt to use and can often get them out of mandated vaccines. Are there any religious or other exemptions in the United Kingdom that apply to vaccinations that are mandated by the government?
They're not mandated. No vaccines are mandated by the government. But for example, the HPV vaccines, the families receive a letter, consent form from the school, and they get a leaflet, the information leaflet on, say, Gardasil vaccine, which, as Norma has said, only states that the side effects are quite mild. They don't get at that stage to see the patient information leaflet, which has a greater list of serious side effects which develop, because they say that comes in the box. So no, what happens is the mother or the father will say, no, I don't give consent. And that is registered. Now, some schools can be quite good about it. The girls just stay in their classroom, and everyone else goes to the hall. they're going to get vaccinated. Now that puts a lot of pressure on these young people, and hopefully there's more and more so that they're not sitting there on their own. But what we've been finding is that nurses and even teachers have been using extreme language and addressing these girls and saying, does your mother want you to get cervical cancer? And this is to a 12-year-old girl. Now, in the United Kingdom, unfortunately, there's a law called Gillick's Law. And Gillick's Law allows a 12-year-old to make her own decision on something like an HPV vaccine. Now, the girl could be approached by the nurse, could be taken into a room. The nurse could say, now, I think I need to speak to you about this. I don't think your mother or yourself understands the seriousness of what could happen to you, and you could get cervical cancer. And because this young 12-year-old, and there's different kinds of 12-year-olds, there's some who are very quiet, very shy, there's others who are much more outspoken and would never ever allow a nurse to change her mind. But she could get that young child to change her mind, and the mother could not do a thing about that because the girl has the right to overrule her mother.
Dr.
Yes.
Rima, as a psychiatrist, would you classify that scenario that was just given to us with the nurse and all as being voluntary consent, or is it something else?
It's actually coerced consent, because a person in a position of authority is applying undue pressure in a context in which there is no ability to meaningfully request additional information, to dissent, to know what the consequences of dissent will be accurately. If you tell a girl, does your mother know? Does your mother want you to get cervical cancer? And not tell her what the chances are. The chances of you getting cervical cancer are actually increased with your taking this vaccine, my dear. And here is the actual factual information. Without that, there is no informed consent. Even if you could imagine that a 12-year-old could give informed consent to any major life choice, which is pretty hard to imagine from where I sit, being a child and adolescent psychiatrist, knowing about developmental issues and coercion and so on. So this is beyond obscene. This is pseudoscientific. This is pseudo justice, and it is, I repeat, obscene.
Yeah. But you see, things have changed, because in the earlier days, when the information leaflets and the package insert leaflets, Norma will confirm this, Merck, the FDA, United Kingdom, Europe, all had in their information that the vaccine didn't contain any viral DNA. Then all of a sudden, out comes the research and the work carried out by Dr. Lee, who discovered the HPV DNA contamination attached to the aluminium adjuvant. And this has been replicated by Professor Belec in France. So he discovered Sane, and he also discovered in Gardasil the DNA of yeast. Now, all of that containing viral DNA is now no longer on the sheets, but the recent GlaxoSmithKline package insert, at the very bottom, you have to scroll down and read it very carefully. It actually talks about what's in the sterile suspension for Cervarix. All the different ingredients are there, the quantities that are in the vaccine. And then at the very end it says, each dose may also contain residual amounts of insect cell and viral protein and bacterial cell protein from the manufacturing process. The DNA of the insect in the Cervarix vaccine. They don't tell the children that. The nurses won't know that. The school teachers and head teacher won't know that. And neither will the parents know that. that this vaccine could be contaminated, and very possibly contaminated with the DNA of the insect which Cerberus's life started on.
Indeed.
So of course they don't tell the child this, nor does the physician tell the mother in the United States, or sometimes the dad, that vaccines may do this and this and this and this, and probably will, and that the child is likely to suffer or may suffer irreversible damage. What doctor is saying that to what patient, what parent? Well, very few, very few. So we're talking about coercive lack of informed consent, and we're talking about violations of the Nuremberg Code. Let me ask you a question. As far as you know, was England a signatory to the Nuremberg Convention? The United States was not. We never said that we actually endorsed informed consent. But did the UK or did England endorse the Nuremberg Convention?
I am sorry, I actually don't know the answer to that.
If it did, and I don't know the answer either, if it did, then what you've just described is very, very much an illegal act, regardless of the law that was passed making it apparently lawful. It is not lawful if England was a signatory to that international convention. International law and treaty trumps domestic law. And you might want to talk to your legal support team about that approach. Ralph, what do you think about that?
I don't know enough about UK law and European law, but I know the European Court of Human Rights is very active, and there might be some redress there. Redress is always the issue. We can have many claims of rights, but it's the rights that we can enforce, that matter. So that's really the question, and that's why I was asking about the exemptions. And you say it's not mandated, but it appears to be forced. It's like we don't the Chinese don't mandate abortions for the second or third pregnancy, but they happen.
Yeah, you're right. And I have the feeling it's increasing in intensity, that the parents are being put under more pressure. There was
Oh yes.
girl up in Scotland who refused her daughter's vaccination, and the nurse phoned her, and she said, "Oh well, I'm not happy about you saying that. I'm going to speak with your daughter personally." And luckily, the form teacher actually intervened and prevented the nurse from doing that. But I read there with the legal cases that are happening now in France and in Spain, because in France, our last number that we're aware of, there's let's say, allegedly up to 55 legal cases have been filed. 30 plus of them are against Sanofi Pasteur, who are the distributor of the vaccine for Merck in Europe, and the others are perhaps more on lack of informed consent. And there's 2 attorneys fighting these. One of the cases is actually unique, and it's a manslaughter case about a young girl who died in 2010 in France. And then there's 2 cases filed in Spain. One is a criminal case, and the other one is again on lack of informed consent, not being given to the families so that they could assess whether their child should get vaccinated or not. And in that case, we know this family very well, Alicia and her daughter Raquel from Valencia. And she, after her second vaccination of Gardasil, she was rushed to hospital because she collapsed. She was put into intensive care. And of course, the vaccine has nothing to do with that. It's just incredible. So we do know that there's possibly another 14 cases in Spain, hopefully, are being worked on. There will be others in France as well. So
that makes it sound like in Europe, certainly in France, the manufacturers of the vaccine have liability. In the United States, they have no liability. And
Yes.
so a vaccine could kill somebody right off the bat, and the manufacturer would still be completely free, completely indemnified against any responsibility. It sounds like that's different in France.
I agree with you there. I haven't gone into the depths of the European law, but it must be correct. In the United Kingdom, we can't do that because I think each state, each country will have their own ways of dealing with things. So, but France, I have to take my hat off to France, because if the French do not like something, they're not frightened to speak out. And they will go onto the streets in a similar fashion to what has been happening in Colombia. And they have put out this recent petition where I believe Norma, well, at 2:30 this morning, the number of signatures on the petition are 325,905. Just short.
Well done. Let's talk about what that petition is and how people can participate in it. I think it's very important.
Very.
Norma, do you want to take over here? Norma?
Oh, maybe we've lost her. I hope that's not the case.
No, we did not lose her.
Oh, very good.
Oh, good.
All right. Okay.
Yes. Let me pull it up. It'll take me just a second. If you have something to discuss for about 30 seconds,
Well,
I'll be
yes,
here.
we have another one of our action items.
Okay.
This one is what we call, this is our proud anti-vaxxer action item, where people can send a message to their legislators here in the United States, telling them that they are not going to accept any more vaccines. And that is another one of our tiny URLs. This is tinyurl.com/vaccine free. tinyurl.com/vaccine free. Dr. Rima.
Let me point out to anybody who's on the fence about vaccines that the reduction in every infectious disease supposedly associated with the introduction of the vaccine actually occurred before the introduction of that vaccine and was accounted for by better food and hygiene, but that there is no such thing as a safe vaccine. So people say, well, what happens if I don't vaccinate and something happens? To which my response is, what happens if you do vaccinate and something happens? If you have an immune support like nanosilver in your cupboard, even the very idea of a vaccine becomes absurd. How important a piece of information that is. If you have the right immune support, no vaccine is ever necessary, and no vaccine has ever been created that is safe. Yes, you might be able to make them safer, but logically, think about it. Can you make people healthier by injecting poison into their bodies?
Doesn't seem likely, does it?
Norma, have you found what you were looking for?
Yes, I have. Thank you.
Good.
Okay. This petition was organized by the Institute for the Protection of Natural Health, based in Brussels, in cooperation with French oncologist and surgeon Professor Henri Joyot. And the petition asks for, I'm scrolling down here, okay. This petition is going to be presented to the President of the French Republic, French Minister of Health and Social Affairs, and the French Minister of National Education. It asks that the human papillomavirus vaccination in French schools be stopped until reasonable vaccine effectiveness has been proven, which would be 15 to 20 years down the road, until we are aware of and can control all of the adverse effects of these vaccines, and until we can be assured that such widespread vaccination will not cause a drop in pap smear screening, the only proven method of preventing cervical cancer. Now, this petition was started initially just for France, but there was so much response from around the world, people asking if they could sign also, that they have agreed to open it up to the world. Anyone in the world that's concerned about HPV vaccines can sign this petition to stop HPV vaccination.
Could you tell people, Norma, where they can go to sign this enormously important petition?
Absolutely. The short URL is, oh goodness, I've got a really, really long one. If I post it on your screen, let's see. Let me see here. What is the best way to do this?
Well, I have, of course, there'll be a pod.
We do want our live listeners to have access to it. So even if you don't have it right now, maybe you can find it.
Go to sanevax.org/French-petition-HPV-vaccines. And I will put it on your screen at the bottom so that you can also stick it up if you wish. That in the first quarter of a page, it tells you where to sign.
Whoops, I think we lost you. Hello?
Norma?
I think we just lost Norma.
Ooh, can we get her back?
I can finish that.
There she is. So it's www.sanevax.org/French-petition-HPV, I think /vaccines. Did I get that right?
Are you there, Norma?
Frida, can you fill in?
I can't quite give you the whole thing, but if they go to www.sanevax.org onto the site, it's a press release. It actually will be right there on the site at the present moment in time.
All right, let me take a look. I'm there right now. This is a very nice website, by the way. Nice website, and it'll be on our podcast as well.
Yes, it's an excellent website. And if you just scroll down a little bit, you'll see the latest articles that have been posted.
Sure.
And the French petition is one of them. You can also go into, I think it's one of the links up above, about us, etc. And you can get into our press releases. And as Norma said, first quarter of the article of the press release gives the instructions and the link to the petition for you to sign, and it gives the instructions in English so that people can understand.
And I believe we're actually coming up to the end of the program. Do I hear bumper music? And that was French-petition-HPV/vaccines at sanevax.org. Dr. Rima, awesome program. Thank you, Frida. Thank you, Norma. Wonderful.
Ladies, thank you for being with us. Folks, SaneVax is a great organization with fabulous information and powerful tools. Thank you so much, Frida Burrell and Norma Johnson, for joining us on the Dr. Rima Truth Report.
Thank you, Rima and Ralph. We appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.